So let's talk a little about, a lot of the absentee ballots. In fact, a record number of absentee ballots were used and asked for in this race. A lot of, or in this election, I should say. This is a special time. We're trying to conduct an election in the middle of a global pandemic. Let's go back to our panel right now. I'm curious as to, Dr. Mata, let's start with you. In your view, as you're watching these elections going on amid this pandemic, what are some of the special challenges? What kind of impact are you expecting this is going to have on voters and the turnout?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we're going to see right away is that it's going to impact how voters get to the polls. We're going to see more voters opting to vote by mail. That's something that we saw previously in our June primaries here in Oklahoma. It's something I expect that we'll see tonight. And it's certainly something that we'll continue to see in November. There's been a lot of talk about absentee voting and mail-in voting. And what we know from the political science literature is that it tends to be quite safe, tends to be implemented by both blue and red states. And generally speaking, it doesn't tend to advantage one side over the other. If you have mail-in voting in a highly red or conservative place, you're going to turn out more Republicans. And if you have mail-in voting in a highly liberal or blue place, you're going to turn out more Democrats. So I think that's potentially a very encouraging thing from a social science point of view, to see more voters using mail-in voting. And we've been seeing historic numbers here in Oklahoma, at least in June, and I expect to see that tonight and in November as well.
All right, there have been, the president has expressed his concerns over the safety of the ballots and such. I do want to mention that we talked to Gwen Freeman today, who's a Tulsa County Election Board secretary. She was telling us that they have had less than 2% of the ballots on the mail-in ballots having any kind of issues whatsoever. And they're running even less than that right now. So I want to throw it out to the other panelists. Anybody want to jump in on this? Talk about absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, election security. Thoughts?
Sure. We've got a great system in Oklahoma. Typically we have notarization that's required. So there is a form of ID that has to be shown, whether you vote in person or you vote via absentee ballot. States that are sending absentee ballot applications to the last known address, there's a built-in problem there because so many people, as I found in my involvement in politics, so many people don't bother to update their voter registration addresses. They may even move out of state or certainly even across the city. And so sending out a request or an absentee ballot without an actual contact from the voter runs the risk of ballots getting misdirected or lost in the mail. A study done right after the 2000 election by MIT and Caltech found that while it's good to have a way to provide an outlet for people who can't be there physically on election day, it's also important to minimize that, because when you remove the voting process out of the eyes of the election judges, out of the eyes of people who are watching to make sure that things are fair, you begin to lose the advantages of the secret ballot, the possibility that somebody could be looking over the voter's shoulder when they mark their ballots. And that's happened. There have been cases out, Bell, California is a pretty prominent one, where absentee ballots were used to keep a corrupt city council in office. Because if you wanted to keep your job with the city, you had to vote your ballot with another city worker looking over your shoulder. So hopefully we can continue to move more in the direction of encouraging people to show up on election day and celebrating together the joy of democracy in America.
All right, other panelists, anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I think I would bring just a little bit of a different narrative to that. I know I have never voted on election day. Not ever. I'm 60 years old. I always vote early, usually 2 or 3 days early, as soon as they can. This year, I was right there at 8:30 waiting for Tulsa County to open so I can make sure I get it, because I don't ever trust my day on election day. I'm afraid I'm going to have a flat tire, or I'm afraid I may feel bad, or I may have a family emergency. So I've always made sure that when I was given the opportunity to do early voting, we have consistently in this state continued to try to reduce access and limit those times and shorten those times. And for us to be in this situation, this time, this life-changing event for all of us, everybody in our country is living through a different period. And so the fact that we've politicized absentee voting or mail-in ballots and they've turned into such big political issues is ridiculous in 2020. We have a very safe electoral system in the United States. It's usually modeled around the country and the world. And so for us to be able to continue to suggest that somebody's going to fraudulently vote, I just can't see it, and I don't see evidence of it. And I think we need to do more to encourage people to participate and make it as easy and accessible. We ought to be able to have every Oklahoman who's a voter age, they ought to be able to have a ballot sent to them in the mail, like other states have used this process.
Better clean up the rolls before you try to do that. Or you're going to find a lot of ballots go in the trash can or get lost somewhere along the way. There have been problems. Take a look at what happened in New Jersey earlier this year to see what can happen when you're really not prepared to have a secure mail-in ballot system. Now, there may be a way to do that securely, but it takes a lot more time to prepare it than we have right now. As Dr. Fauci noted, it's no more dangerous to show up for the 4 or 5 minutes it takes to go into the polling place and vote than it is to go to the grocery store and go shopping. It really doesn't have to be political, but it is interesting to see how things tend to fall along partisan lines in this case.
If I can add a couple of other perspectives here, we haven't talked as much yet about what it is that voters want and what it is that poll workers want. And when we turn to public opinion research, by and large, having some vote by mail option, although voters may quibble over what that looks like, but having some vote by mail option is uniformly very popular in public opinion research. And from the perspective of poll workers, we've been seeing across the country that areas that are holding elections in person are increasingly seeing poll workers not want to show up on election day. We know from previous academic research that poll workers tend to be older than the average American. And so finding a way to get younger people involved with that process, because whatever we end up having on election day, it will almost in all likelihood involve both in mail and in-person voting in November. Finding a way to get younger people involved in that is going to be one of the top priorities going forward.
Absolutely. I want to throw this out. Ariel or Andrea or Amanda, any word on this that you'd like to add?
I mean, I agree. I think it's really about creating more access for voters, even aside from it being related to the current health pandemic. I think the system can get it. If we want to continue to drive voter engagement, we need to start thinking about ways that we can make it.
Right. Anyone else?
Absolutely. And to add on to that, getting people who are able to work at the polls, I mean, that's incredibly important, especially knowing that the age tends to skew a little older for our poll workers is particularly critical in the pandemic now. But also to add on to what Toby said, early voting really is an important piece. In the past, Typros has hosted early voting block parties to try to get young people out and excited about voting early. We've also worked with Tulsa Voter Van to try to increase transportation access to make sure that people can physically get to the polls, and just really ensuring that young people are part of this critical process, only from the voting end, but all the way through working at the polls, and showing up and supporting these electoral processes is really, really critical to making sure that we can get as many people out and having their voice heard in our community.